Hey everybody, my name is Paul Liston Jr., aka Boy Green. I'm the New York Jets digital reporter for Heavy.com. We're streaming live simultaneously in 3 different places to over 25,000 New York Jet fans on our Heavy on Jets page. Thanks for stopping by. We're on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/BoyGreen25. Like and subscribe. Do your support for the show, baby. And of course, on Twitter @BoyGreen25 as well. We're here late on a Tuesday evening to bring on my main man that you could hear every Tuesday on the Man Child Show with me, Boy Green, on the radio side, but we have the week off for the holidays, so we're going to bring him on the video side. You know, the best looking Jets beat reporter, of course, from radio. Let's bring him on the television so you can see that beautiful mug, and that is Zack Rosenblatt of The Athletic. What's up, Zack?
Thanks, man. I always thought I had a face for radio, but you made it sound different now, so I feel good now.
Yeah, see, well, there you go. I guess we both do, and now we're forced to be here, so we'll make the best of it if we can, Zack. And I have to ask you, here's just where I'm trying to get on the Zach Wilson thing right off the get-go. So, okay, he gets benched the first time, November 20th, 10-3, accountability, all this other BS. The Jets say, okay, he is QB3. He needs to work on a bunch of crap before we can see Zach Wilson again. We're like, all right, well, we'll see what happens. And then all of a sudden, Zach Wilson's promoted to QB2 and eventually QB1 ahead of the Detroit game because of the Mike White thing. They're like, he's fixed. Booyah. Here's Zach Wilson. Like, okay, great. Let's see where this is going. And then after the Jacksonville game, oh, good Lord, no, back to QB3, back in the dungeon where we put you, Zach Wilson. You are clearly not ready. Like, how did we get here? What happened? How is it going like this? And all of a sudden, Zach Wilson is back in the cave for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately they didn't think they were going to have to play him after 3 weeks. I think they thought maybe they would get at least a little more time before they had to really make that decision. And ultimately, Mike White forced their hand. I think Joe Flacco, he is what he is. He can't really move. And you saw the problems with that when he came in a pinch. Like, I don't, it was a tough spot for Flacco in that Bills game, but he did fumble it away right away. And he did sail a pass over. I think it was Conklin. I can't remember. It feels like ages.
Yes, yeah.
And so they decided at that point that they thought Wilson, at least with his mobility, is a better backup option. And then, what happened with White happened. And it was clear once Zach went out there that he's still, all the same problems are still there. They definitely didn't get better. I mean, the Jaguars game might have been worse than even either of the Patriots games in a lot of ways, considering everything. So it was, I don't know. It's wild. I've had like commenters on some of the stories and people on Twitter be like, all right, can you write about something other than the quarterback? And I get it. I'm tired of writing about quarterbacks, but I can't imagine there's been a quarterback situation like this before with so many, from Flacco to Wilson to White's up to number 2 and then White starting, and then Wilson's up to number 2 and then Wilson starting, and Chris Streveler's in the game randomly. And there's been like so many different angles for this quarterback room, and we don't know who the quarterback is for next year. So it's going to be a topic. Like anybody who's mad about hearing about quarterbacks now, just wait for the off season, because that's going to be all anyone's talking about.
100%. Now, I need your take on this because I find it fascinating. So, Jay Glazer on Saturday actually drops the bombshell on the NFL on Fox pregame show that, hey, the Jets are moving on from Zach Wilson. Now, again, Zach Wilson not being the starter in 2023 is one thing. After everything we've seen recently, we're like, okay, I totally understand if that's not the case. But straight up moving on from the number 2 overall pick after 2 years, like not suggesting as if, this is how I read it, that he wouldn't even be on the roster. I'm like, whoa, like that. I didn't see that one coming. And Zach, I know you're not an overall NFL insider. That's like not your job description, but a lot of people say, as soon as Jay Glazer's report came out, and I tweeted out the clip, I got a lot of, Joe Douglas runs a tight ship, nothing gets out of there. But, like, Jay Glazer has a job to do, and I get that, like, Salah has a job to do with how he answered it, but can you give us that side of things with the Jay Glazer thing? Like, how did you see it from your seat doing your job and hearing the Jay Glazer thing come out over the weekend? What was your take on it?
Jay Glazer as connected as anybody is, obviously. So I'm
sure, right? Yeah.
I think that report was premature because I don't think they've made a decision on what they want to do with Zach yet. I don't think they've gotten like 3 steps ahead where they're like, all right, we're getting rid of him now. Like, I don't think that's where their head's at. I think right now their focus is on trying to make the playoffs and developing him behind the scenes. To your point, like Salah's not going to go out and say like, we want to get rid of him. Obviously he's going to say we want him, we believe in him and all that stuff. And I've written this and I've said it, and I don't see any scenario where he's a starter for them next year. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily think that means he's definitely not going to be on the roster, though. So I'm still open to the possibility that he's on the roster next year. You hang on to him. You hope he figures some things out behind the scenes when there's no more eyes on him, no more pressure on him. And then if they need a call on him, they do. And if not, or you try and trade him or whatever it is. I'm sure if Douglas got a really good offer, he'd consider it. But I don't know. I'm not like 100% sure he's not going to be on the team next year. I'm just positive he's not going to be the starter next year is how I would phrase it.
And I'm in the same pool. I don't envision any world now. I think even as the most vocal of Zach Wilson supporters after that Jaguars game, I mean, there's nothing left. I'm like, I don't even know if you go to Flacco or Streveler. I mean, like, you just got to do something, I guess. That's where all the wind came out of the sails for me. The final one, I thought, oh, man, Zach Wilson has a chance to disrupt the plan. Robert Saleh kept leaving the door open saying, hey, you know what? Our plan is get Zach Wilson back on the field. And because of some confluence of circumstances, it happens. So I'm like, oh, perfect. Against these two home games, if Zach Wilson shows anything, it'll be the perfect excuse not to go back to Mike White. And obviously they lose both of those games and blow it. So I guess that was his final chance. So what's your gut say, that this is the final time we've seen Zach Wilson in Jets uniform? Or do you believe ultimately, maybe he's a backup third string or however you see it in the future?
It's so hard to figure out, honestly, because it also partly depends on how they feel about Mike White, if they want to go and pursue somebody greater than that. So I'm not like ready to make a prediction or anything. As of right now, if I had to guess, I think he might be on the team still in training camp. But I also do think there would be teams. I don't know what like level of interest there would be. I don't know what the draft value would be. I do think he's the kind of player, and you've seen this over and over and over again, where another team's going to be like, well, they couldn't figure him out, but get him in our situation out in New York, we'll be able to do it, and maybe they'll be right. Maybe they won't, but I definitely think there are some teams that would be down to trade for him and develop him, because you can never have like enough talented quarterbacks. So I think there would be interest. I don't know what level, like I said. So that's why, I mean, Joe Douglas is tied to the Zach Wilson draft pick, whether he likes it or not, obviously. So giving up on him and trading him for a 5th round pick, I don't think that's going to cut it. So that's going to be a factor, I would say.
All right, Zach, give me your opinion on this, because it's interesting. It's an interesting debate on social media. It's okay. Sam Darnold had 3 years, and then they traded him for a 2, 4, and a 6. Zach Wilson's only had 2 years. Now, you can make the case that Sam Darnold in his 3 years showed a little bit more than Zach Wilson showed, obviously, in his 2 years. But what's more valuable potentially to an acquiring team? Seeing a little bit more from Sam Darnold, and they gave up 2, 4, 6, or you have an extra cheap year of rookie contract control over Zach Wilson, and that potentially is more attractive, especially in a developing sense. Which one is better or worse in your mind?
I don't know. I don't really know if I have an answer, honestly. I think it just depends on what the other teams feel about this. Like it just depends on their evaluation of Sam Darnold versus Zach Wilson. Like it's really hard to answer that, honestly. No, that's not a sexy answer, but I honestly have no idea what his value is around the league. It's so hard to read right now. I think you still see a lot of times, you see a lot of like anonymous quotes, and you still talk to people around the league and they think he has like very intriguing ability. But if you watch any of the film from this year, I think it might scare some people away. So it's a very like, it depends on how much these teams are heavily weighing traits versus what you see on film.
All right, let's get another Zach Wilson one in here before we progress to the rest of the conversation here. Again, we're speaking with Zack Rosenblatt of the Gosh Darn Athletic, baby. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at Zach Blatt for all kinds of groovy stuff. And, of course, you can subscribe to The Athletic. There you go, Tim McMaster, wherever you are. Somewhere you're slowly nodding in a corner for that Athletic subscription shout-out I just gave you. You're welcome for that, Tim. One more on Zach Wilson here, and it's simply this. What did the Jets get wrong with Zach Wilson? Because the Sam Darnold thing, the complaint was there wasn't enough talent around, or the coaching was questionable, this. A million excuses from Jet fans. It seems like those excuses don't exist. Sure, there were obviously unbelievable amount of injuries this year, but still they had more talent and support really than anyone could have possibly imagined. So what ultimately did they get wrong here? Because it's not like the Jets were the only one that were high on Zach Wilson in the 2021 NFL draft.
I think if they got anything wrong, I think it's that they thought he was going to be ready to play when he first came into the NFL. I think it's pretty clear he was a raw prospect that needed some seasoning. And I think maybe if there was a mistake, it was handing him the job as a rookie without any veteran in the building. I think they would admit, even if maybe not publicly, but I think they would admit that they maybe made an error there. Although I don't know, it's not like they were going to make the playoffs last year, so you kind of get the idea of like letting him work through his growing pains and all that. But anyway, I still think he was ready, and maybe that was the mistake, and maybe you overvalued the film from his last year at BYU where he wasn't going against anybody in that COVID year. But like you said, a lot of people evaluated him this way. I don't know if I blame anyone, or I don't know if they necessarily like had the wrong approach. Because if you look at how productive quarterbacks have been, not named Zach Wilson, like clearly there's something missing. I've said this. I think as much as it's on Zach Wilson's shoulders, I do think the coaching staff's job was to put him in position to succeed, and he didn't succeed. So I think that it's fair to criticize LaFleur to a degree. But like you said, a position to succeed, they surrounded him with talent. Like the Trevor Lawrence comparison, like Trevor Lawrence last year and this year arguably had a worse situation. Doug Peterson maybe is a different factor, but in terms of like the investment the Jets have put in the offensive line, Garrett Wilson, when Breece Hall was healthy, like Zach Wilson has had a better supporting cast and he's been worse. So you can't really blame Joe Douglas. I think Robert Saleh's handled it about as well as he could. Ultimately, I just don't think he was ready for it. And this was going to be a year where he could like work through that stuff, and they became too good. So.
Interesting. Well, let's go to the Mike White thing. So there's 2 games left, and Mike White was medically cleared earlier this week. That's amazing. And we've got the Seahawks game and the Miami game. I ask you this, Zach. Do the Jets know what? So, like, obviously the locker room loves Mike White. It seems like the coaching staff really likes Mike White. Like, do they know in theory whether they want to, like, they're going to re-sign him or not? Or is it too hyper? I don't know. You tell me if it's too hyperbolic to say that these next 2 games will determine Mike White's future with the Jets.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't say they will determine the future. I think they will definitely play like a heavy role in what they decide to do from here. I think they were really hoping to have this whole end of the season to be able to evaluate Mike White as opposed and losing those 2 games, especially against 2 bad defenses. Like in theory, he should have like went out and blown up those defenses. But this is definitely an evaluation period. They really, I'm sure they have their eye on some of these veteran quarterbacks, whether they want to go and pursue them or not, or whether they want to, attach them alongside Mike White as the backup or whatever it is. I think they're open to the possibility that Mike White can be the guy. I don't know what they feel in terms of if he is or how much it's going to take to keep him. Like he's a fascinating one in terms of, I would say, even if they're not basing everything off these last 2 games, I think his contract value is going to, whether it's here or somewhere else, he's going to either make himself a lot of money or lose himself some money these next 2, or if they make the playoffs 3 weeks, whatever it is. So that's the most interesting thing to me about this whole thing. Like what his value is, how the Jets value him, and if they believe that he can be the guy.
I don't know if you can even answer this because, again, we're in the middle of it. And as you said, it's so important these next 2 games, how it determines that value. But, like, what does Michael White command? Like, he's made nothing in his career so far. He's a 5th-round pick. He got the restricted free agent tender last year. Like, he's made, again, relatively speaking, I'll take 2-point-something million, please. But, relatively speaking, he's, like, made nothing. Like, what is his value right now? Because the quarterback position is scarce in the NFL. So it seems like someone's going to pay him. The example that jumps out to me all the time is Matt Flynn with the Seahawks. He had 1 good game at the final regular season game in that Lions-Packers game. He had $22.5 million on a 3-year deal. Not too shabby for a guy that like had done nothing. Like, and Mike White in theory has shown a little bit more than Matt Flynn does. And now we have these next 2 games. So like, what the heck is Mike White's value? And obviously the quarterback value chart has changed dramatically since Matt Flynn to now.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I don't know. I guess it depends on if a team views him as like a no doubt starter or if they view him as like a bridge or a guy you're going to bring in to compete. Like I think you've seen guys in like the Mike White or worse or a little bit better range of like the Jacoby Brissett's, the Mitchell Trubisky's. I think they wind up getting somewhere like 7 to 12 million a year or something like that, like for a 1-year deal, like a prove it thing, or maybe it's a 2-year deal. And, like the deal Tyrod Taylor got in with the Giants. Like I could see like right now, I would say that maybe that would be my guess. But I think he can make himself a lot of money, like I said, over these next 2 weeks. His numbers have been pretty good. I know they haven't won and they haven't finished all their drives that they needed to, but that's one of the things that fascinates me. I don't really know what QBs are a very interesting thing with the money, especially like if they're not a star, like how much are they worth? And that's like the fascinating like debate that GMs are having, I'm sure.
Yeah, and that's a tough thing for me is because I evaluate it somewhere in that range. That ultimately, I believe Mike White's going to get somewhere between a 2 or 3 year deal, somewhere in that ballpark. Where again, it's like 7-8 million to somewhere around 13 or 14 million potentially, somewhere in that range for Mike White. But if you invest in that, like I imagine that's got to be the majority of your eggs in the basket. If you're the New York Jets, you can't then turn around and give, I don't know, Jimmy Garoppolo 25 or 30 million a year or another thing. So I guess my question is, would it be underwhelming if it's Mike White, Zach Wilson, and Jacoby Brissett? Maybe, I don't know. Like, I feel like if you invest in Mike White, then you can't go get the really proven veteran because it's going to be too expensive and you won't have enough money. Is that crazy to say?
It again, it's I don't know. I guess it depends on like I don't know if they pay Jimmy Garoppolo, let's say 25 million. Would they
Sure.
be down to bring Mike White back at 8 million? Like maybe I don't know. I mean, it's a lot to commit to the quarterback position, but you've seen quarterbacks, especially I think the Jets have learned their lesson with like not going into the season with like preparation at. Although Mike White, they discovered him because they didn't have anybody. So I guess ultimately
Right.
it was the right decision, I guess. But yeah, I don't know. It's that's going to be the debate they're having. I mean, Mike White, if he has a chance to start somewhere else too, like he's not going to like if the Jets want to sign Jimmy G or Derek Carr or whoever, one of these guys, Daniel Jones. If Mike White has the opportunity to start somewhere else, which I don't know if he will, I don't really know what the league thinks of him right now. It's still like the crazy thing with him is he only started like 6 games in his career still. Like he's
Right.
very raw
Yeah.
in a way. In that we don't really know like what a full season of Mike White looks like. So that's kind of like it's also a projection in a lot of ways, which is why maybe he wouldn't get as much this offseason. So yeah, I don't know. It's going to be very interesting. I'm very curious to see what his market looks like.
Okay, I want you to either kill this or pat on the back. I mean, you can do whatever you want with it. I've seen a lot of Jet fans go, you know what? Daniel Jones over the Giants, man. If you put him on the Jets with all these better weapons, who knows? And every time I hear that, I'm like, oh, Daniel Jones, like gross. Like every game I've ever seen, it just doesn't do it for me. The stats don't really do it for me. I saw the Vikings pick. I'm like, man, I just don't see it with Daniel Jones. But you're a guy, Zach, before you got this sexy, cushy job with the Athletic, you were covering some Daniel Jones action. Like, you tell me, are you on that bandwagon with all these people that have been kind of buzzing about it? I heard even, he who shall not be named Connor Hughes bring it up a few times. I'm like, Daniel Jones, gross.
I mean, I wouldn't rule it out, honestly. I think it's a possibility. If I don't know if he's going to hit the market is the thing. I don't know if the Giants are going to let him go, so I don't know if that'll even be an option. But he's kind of like if they have Daniel Jones this year, they probably have like 10 wins right now. Like
Probably. Yeah.
So I guess that's the interesting place they're at because it's not that easy to go and get a star quarterback. They don't really come available very often. So you have to decide: do we want to wait till we can get the next star, or do we want to go and get somebody who can be solid? And they showed this year that if they have a solid quarterback, they can compete with anybody. And they did not have a solid quarterback this year. So Daniel Jones can be that. When I watched Daniel Jones, he didn't have the great system around him. Like the supporting cast thing we were talking about earlier. Like he had as bad of a support system as anyone could have to start their career. Went from Shermer to Joe Judge. The Joe Judge disaster those 2 years. The receiver group the last couple of years with the Giants have been absolutely disaster. And now he has bad receivers, great coaching, and it's worked wonders. And he's a great athlete. Like if you're worried about the Jets O-line going into next year, he's a guy that can get out of the pocket. They can do design runs. He does what he's told. Like he's good at. He's not going to like go off schedule very much, which I know is like both an appeal and a detriment for Zach Wilson in a lot of ways. So I think Daniel Jones is intriguing. That's another like at what price point. But if you believe in him talent wise, I don't know how much is too much. If you believe he can lead you to a Super Bowl, like then you go and get him. But do I believe that? I'm not quite sure. But I do think he's a guy that can lead them to the playoffs at least. And I think Jets fans will take that right now.
That's true. Again, we're speaking with Zach Rosenblatt here. Are the Jets a quarterback away from competing, Zach, in your mind?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they need to fix the offensive line for sure. But I mean, they were 5-2 with this offensive line, and it was more banged up back then in a way. And yeah, so I think ultimately, if you just look at this season, and if this defense comes back and guys get better, and I think they're gonna have to decide what they want to do with guys like C.J. Mosley and Carl Lawson, and they're gonna have to find safeties, and they have some holes still, but they have the talent on defense, and they have Garrett Wilson. They'll have Breece Hall coming back. They have Bam Knight coming back. Elijah Moore will be happier. That they have the 2 tight ends that they like now. Like that, this is a team that I don't know if they're going to compete for a Super Bowl next year unless they go and get like Lamar Jackson or something. But I do think like quarterback away in the sense that I think they're a quarterback away from being taken seriously. That's for sure.
Okay. And on this offensive line thing, do you think the Jets just ran out of luck, or I don't know how else to put it? Because obviously they've had obviously a crazy amount of injuries on the offensive line, and Joe Douglas has figured it out. They've had depth, so like when guys have gone down, they've been able to just kind of survive and hold serve. But like now, obviously, it seems like the bottom has fallen out. Is that because like it's just run out? Like there's a reason why people are backups. They're backups so they can serve for a few games, but it just shows why they're not starters. Is that ultimately where we've gotten with this offensive line kind of falling apart?
Yeah, I will say I like it is pretty stark the contrast in numbers the offensive line puts up with Zach versus other quarterbacks. I think there's something to be said for having a quarterback that gets rid of the ball quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I do think this is a group of like solid players. There's no stars on this. Once they lost Elijah Vera Tucker, they had no like star level players anymore. So you have a bunch of solid guys, and if you're average to below average to above average in that range, the variance is going to be wider week to week. Like Elijah Vera Tucker was not having bad games, but Laken Tomlinson, 1 week you don't really know what you're going to get from him. Which he's honestly been a disappointment relative to what they paid. I think that's fair to say. Dwayne Brown's older and he's been battling that shoulder thing, and I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. I think he's been fine week to week. Again, you never know how much pain he's in. George Fant, I think it's been a rough go for him. Nate Herbig's kind of come down to earth, like you said, and Connor McGovern a little bit too. But yeah, there's a chance we sit here at this time at the beginning of training camp, they have a completely like revamped offensive line, and that's going to be another fascinating thing this offseason because they have Mekhi Becton. I don't know if you can rely on him, but the talent is obviously there, but you don't know what you're getting there. So it's almost just gravy if he can become anything. You don't know, is Dwayne Brown going to retire? Are you going to cut him? George Fant's probably gone. Nate Herbig, free agent. Connor McGovern, free agent. So Elijah Vera Tucker and Laken are the only two that I'm pretty confident are going to be starters next year. The rest, like, you could get all new guys. You could bring guys back. Don't really know what they're going to do. But that's something that Joe Douglas prides himself on is the offensive line thing, and he still hasn't figured it out yet. It's not like he hasn't taken swings. I don't think you can blame him for most of the moves he's made on the O-line. I know the Mekhi pick over like Wirfs looks bad in retrospect, but I mean everybody was happy with the Becton pick in the beginning of his rookie year. So I don't blame Douglas for any of the moves he's made in the O-line. They just haven't worked out, and this offseason is a very important one for the regime. So.
All right, let's go with a couple quickies, Zach, before we get you out of here. Chris Streveler, how could we not get him, obviously, on the show? And I heard that there was like a running bet heading into that last Sala presser between you and some of the beat about the over-under on Chris Streveler questions. I mean, how did it feel to finally get him in the game on Thursday night and then knowing that, okay, I can ask some legitimate questions here about Chris Streveler? How did all that feel? And kind of crazy in the same sense that the number 2 overall pick was benched for a practice squad Chris Streveler in primetime.
Well, to that point, that was just Mark Cannizzaro from the New York Post just giving me crap. It's kind of like a running because that's my bit. Obviously, as you know, anyone who listens to the Can't Wait podcast or follows, right. It's kind of my bit. And so they all acted like when he went in the game that I was like celebrating with the fans. I was not. I'm a professional. I was like, oh, he's in. So I actually I told this on the Can't Wait podcast. I had heard earlier in the day from a source that they were going to activate him that day, but they asked me not to report it because they wanted it to be like a secret leading up to like as long as they could. And I think that's the right move. I think it did catch them off guard a little bit because you saw him moving the ball. I think the craziest thing about all of that, and this was my game story. Like in any other world, like Chris Streveler is probably like the story of that game. He's on national TV. This guy has been a journeyman. He started his career in the CFL. He was in South Dakota in college, and he's playing in the second half of a game with playoff implications for the Jets.
Right.
And not only that, but when he goes out and he runs for like 5 yards, that everybody celebrates as if they just won the Super Bowl. Like it was one of the wildest sequences, especially because he came in like it was the moment where Zach Wilson went out and they booed him coming out onto the field. And then before he could even snap it, they pulled Zach out and put Streveler in. And like the contrast and like a lot of it had to do with how frustrated the fans were with Zach, but I've never seen a crowd just like come together in that way for a guy like Chris Streveler and against a guy like Zach Wilson. It was not even like it was rough conditions weather-wise. It's not like it was a full stadium, but it was loud. Like that was as loud of a cheer as I've heard. When Streveler completed that pass, I think his first pass, can't remember who it was to, maybe Garrett Wilson. That was what. So it was cool for Streveler. I am intrigued at the like Taysom Hill package idea, although if I'm cool with it in the sense that like if your running game's not getting going, you use it. But like the Saints, I think, use it a little too much. And like if Mike White's getting going, I don't know if you want to pull him off the field kind of thing. But yeah, so I don't know. I'm intrigued to see if they use him again the rest of the year. But that was definitely fun. It was definitely great for the bit. The preeminent Streveler podcast, like I said, it was a big moment for the White podcast. But yeah, I mean, good for him. He's a good dude too, and he belongs in the league. I think he's proven. There's a lot worse quarterbacks in the NFL than Chris Streveler. Even if he's not like the best, he doesn't have the best arm, but he can move and he can do what you have to do. I think so. I think he belongs in the league, whether it's on practice squads or a third string or whatever. I think he belongs in the league.
Yeah, again, the thing was fun and the bit was fun, but as soon as like CG Uzama was wide open for what would have been an 80-yard touchdown, he goes,
that's how you knew how bad it was, because the fans still cheered that, even though it could have been a touchdown, but they were like, we'll take it at completion. Yeah.
Right. That to me was the funniest part. So like I see it like kind of comes up when they show the other camera angle. I'm like, oh, and I'm like, wow, CJ has to really come back for that. And then the crowd's going wild, and then they show the replay. I'm like, oh my god, that should have been an 82-yard touchdown.
I didn't realize in the moment how badly he missed it too, because he was wide open. Yeah.
Yeah, that was brutal, but still really cool on the Chris Streveler thing. Okay, Zach, normally here's my bit always on the radio show, bringing you on, is forcing you to make some level of a prediction here. At least this time, you know who the quarterback's going to be with Mike White. Again, there is a palpable buzz. The story that, again, can be written. It's a Hollywood script on paper that with all the things that happened over the weekend, the Jets actually have a very legitimate shot at making the playoffs if they win their two, and the Patriots just lose one of their two, and they could lose both for all we know, but we'll see on the two-way situation with Miami and Buffalo. So there's a buzz, there's a story, but for the story to be there, the Jets have to win. If they lose in Seattle, it's official. They're eliminated from playoff contention. So they have to win for anything to mean anything in Week 18. What does your gut say heading out to the West Coast?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny that I think, and Tyler Conklin kind of alluded to this when he spoke to us yesterday, like it felt like it was over, like the playoff hopes were over when they lost on Thursday night. I think it almost helped them that they had a few days to kind of sit back and watch everything. Because if that loss to the Jaguars had happened on Sunday, I think maybe people aren't as positive right now. But you can feel a little momentum, Mike White coming back. I think we saw what that did the last time he came in. So I think they win. I'll say Jets 20, Seahawks 13.
All right, beautiful. All right, well, we'll see what happens. A lot of revenge. Geno Smith, of course, gets his chance. That's, I'm sure, he wrote, but they didn't write back, whatever that line is. Pete Carroll back in 94. So there's a lot of Jet Seahawks stuff here that lies beneath the surface. Well, Zach, happy holidays, man. Glad we could get you here on the program, and excited for more stuff, man. It's going to be a lot of fun. Thank you so much, as always, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, bud.
All right, there he is, my good buddy, Zack Rosenblatt of The Athletic. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We'll see you next time.